Now, when you look at the state of the world, what you see is a lot of people making a lot of decisions that they feel are in their best interest as far as a relationship goes, sexually speaking. And we see that there's a lot of confusion concerning that. There's confusion whether a man should be with more than one woman at a time, where a man feels like he doesn't have to marry them, he just wants to hop around from one to another. That's an obvious issue where we see a lot of people are growing up without fathers. Why? Because these men feel that they don't have to be committed to one particular person. They don't have to be committed in a relationship. But God has different plans. And another kind of perversion that we see is sexual perversion between two men. One man being sexually attracted to another man, acting on those feelings. A woman being sexually attracted to another woman, acting on those feelings. Men being attracted to little boys, acting on those feelings. And you understand where I'm going with this. Because men have forgotten God. They've forgotten that after you die, you're going to have to give an account for the way that you lived. And so we want to go over a very clear example of this. And one of those examples is in Genesis chapter 19, and it's the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, Sodom and Gomorrah are towns or cities that God destroyed. The question is, why did he destroy towns, and why did he destroy cities, and what's God have to do with who I choose to be with sexually? Well, first of all, according to Genesis chapter 1, God created mankind on earth to have dominion over the earth and to take care of each other, to take care of the land, and also to love him as he has required, as he has created us to love him. So what happens is people begin to hijack their own lives, not realizing that they didn't choose to come here. And because they didn't choose to come here, then they don't choose how they live now that they're here. So what we see is God saying that because I allowed you the breath of life, because I gave you that body, because I gave you those functions, I expect something from you. Now, Genesis chapter 19 articulates this, and it shows that because God created us with a certain purpose, he expects us to live that purpose out. All of us have garbage cans in our houses, and those garbage cans represent the place that things go when they no longer serve their purpose, or when their purpose has been fulfilled, like a wrapper on a piece of gum or on some other household product or food. You throw away the wrapper because you don't need it anymore, or you might even recycle it, but either way, it's getting out of the house at some point. Same thing with technological devices. When they're no longer functional, when they no longer serve the purpose that you bought them for, when they're no longer of use, you get rid of them. God is the same way. When people no longer serve their use, then God, in his anguish, gets rid of them, because they have forgotten the purpose and they've forgotten him and don't realize that God created us for himself. And so if you look at Genesis chapter 19, it's a clear story about what happens when nations or people depart from God and decide to make decisions as to how they're going to live on their own. Genesis 19 starts off and says, "And there came two angels to Sodom at evening, and Lot sat at the gate of Sodom, and Lot, seeing them, rose up to meet them, and he bowed himself with his face toward the ground." So Lot thought that these men were highly respectable men. He didn't know that they were angels. And he said, "Behold now, my lords, turn in, I pray you, into your servant's house, and stay all night, and wash your feet, and you will rise up early, and go on your way." And they said, "No, but we will abide in the street." Because the reason why the angels went there was to check out the land of Sodom and the land of Gomorrah, to see if the sin that they had heard about in heaven, because when we sin, God hears from heaven, and he sends his angels, or he will send his people to testify of what they see to him. Not that he doesn't see it, but there is a way that God operates, and this is a glimpse into one of the ways that he operates. He does like to use instruments and vessels to fulfill his purposes. Verse 3 says, "And he pressed upon them greatly, and they turned in unto him, and entered into his house. And he made them a feast, and did bake unleavened bread, and they did eat. But before they laid down, the men of the city, even the men of Sodom, surrounded the house, both old and young, all the people from every quarter. And they called unto Lot, and said unto him, Where are the men which came into you this night? Bring them out, that we may know them." Now that phrase, "to know them," is talking about knowing them intimately. People have debated this. Those who support the homosexual movement have debated this because they say, well, no, that word "no" doesn't mean sex. Well, the Bible says Adam knew his wife Eve and she got a child. So you know when it's in that context, and you normally can tell according to the context, it reveals that yes, it's talking about sex. We're going to see that as we continue to read. Verse 6 says, and Lot went out at the door unto them, and shut the door after him, and said, I pray you, brethren, don't do so wickedly. Behold, now I have 2 daughters. Okay, if it was just about to get acquainted with these guys, Lot wouldn't be saying, behold, I have 2 daughters, which have not known a man, which have not been sexually intimate with a man. Let me, I pray you, bring them out unto you, and do you to them as is good in your eyes. Only unto these men do nothing, for therefore came they under the shadow of my roof. And they said, stand back. And they said again, this one fellow came in to travel, and he's trying to be a judge. Now will we deal worse with you than with them. And they pressed sore upon the man, even Lot, and came near to break the door down. But the men, the angels, put forth their hand and pulled Lot into the house and shut the door, and they smote them and hit the men that were at the door of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they tired themselves to find the door. So these men were so driven by their lust that even though they were blind, they were still trying to find the door. And that's what governed these men. So homosexuality is a sin that governs the person's life when the person yields to these ungodly affections. So you might be asking yourself, well, wait a second, what happens when I have these feelings? What am I supposed to do? It's the same thing that you do when you feel like you want to kill somebody. The same thing you feel like when you want to set something on fire. For some of you pyromaniacs out there, when you want to break something, you want to hurt somebody for hurting you, or you want to act a certain way according to your feeling. If you lived your life according to every feeling that you had, you know what? And if each of us did that, this world would have long been destroyed. But that's why we're in the condition that we are in, because we live our lives according to our own desires, according to our own ambitions. And when you do that, you will reap the destruction and the corruption that goes along with that. When a man sees a little child and has a sexual impulse toward that little child, he has a responsibility to deal with it. The government doesn't have a responsibility to aid him in committing sexual vampirism on this child. No, the government shouldn't make provision for 8-year-olds to be given to these lustful men. That's what happened in Greece and in Rome. And I guarantee if people have their depraved way, it'll be happening here in the United States. I mean, it's going on in other countries. And so we have to get to a point where we understand that God is going to judge the city that acts in this way. Now, homosexuality isn't the only sin. It's among the sins that men commit. Not everybody commits the sin of homosexuality, but people do commit the sin of perversion, and they pervert from the truth. They pervert